If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the most terrifying thing that you've seen in the woods? I was solo camping and was on a hike to my favorite spot. I saw what looked like a man holding a massive rock in one hand and a knife in the other, facing me. This was pretty weird, but other bushcrafters have been known to camp there too, so I gave the standard "hey man" shout and wave. I got a bit closer, and it looked like it was just a rock. I laughed it off and turned around, staring to walk away. A rock whizzed by my right ear, fast enough and big enough to really hurt me if it had hit me. I turned around to where the rock had come from, and the figure I'd seen wasn't there anymore. It's not what I saw, it's what I didn't see. Years ago I decided to go hunting. Thing is, I don't really like hunting, but I do enjoy target shooting and really just wanted an excuse to walk around in the woods. I didn't expect to see anything, and I'd never gone alone before. I was fairly familiar with the area, though I hadn't been there much, and I kept getting this weird feeling I was being watched. I kept going up this trail and a little bit out of it, and the feeling I was being watched was getting weirder as it felt stronger. Nobody was in the area, probably wasn't anyone for at least a mile, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Then I felt really odd. Like I was in a vacuum or something. I don't know how to explain it. I realized there were no sounds. I didn't feel any breeze anymore, nothing. No birds chirping, no random swaying sounds of leaves or branches, no squirrels chattering, nothing. Extremely odd for this area. I suddenly had this impending sense of doom, and I literally ran the hell out of the woods for a full mile or so, got into my car and left. I still don't know what happened. It may have been me just freaking out to a very bizarre quietness and stillness, but I don't think it was. Something odd was happening there, and while I wasn't in the area, there is a giant forest area in my state where tons of people over the past 200 years have disappeared without a trace, and people report feeling weird and seeing or noticing strange things. I wasn't even thinking about that at the time or after, but something weird was happening and I wanted to GTFO fast. Okay, when I was in the woods 4 months ago, I have camped that's so deep in the woods no one other than me can find it. Well, anyway, I was bring back a kill. I had hunted a rabbit, and was about to cook it when I see something off in the distance. I took a look and I fucking see a man back flipping in the woods heading directly towards my camp at a speed and accurately that wasn't human and more well demon-like. As it ran towards, I threw my hatchet to scare it away, but I missed of course, and let's just say the more it backflipped towards me I noticed it was pale, like the blood had been drained from it, and it had no genitals, no tits, balls, etc. None of that. Its eyes though. Its eyes were black as obsidian and its claws looked sharp and long. Anything else I couldn't see as I booked it by then and ran back home. The scariest thing, I remembering seeing that thing when I was 12 years old on a camping trip with school, and I chalked it up to my imagination at the time, but to think of it now I don't think I was dreaming. See, when I was 12 I went on a camping trip with school as it was summer and school had 2 weeks left till we were out for the summer, and I spent the entire day exploring the woods near the field we were camping in and came across that thing looking at me in the trees with them same dark obsidian-like eyes of which wanted to devour me, and of course I ran back to camp never to speak a word of it again to anyone. Till now, the most terrifying part was I was in a tent with another male student as they split up boys and girls in separate tents to avoid physical contact to one another. If you get my meaning. Anyway, me and my mate were talking about video game before we fell asleep, and next thing we both hear this scrabbling across the ground and near some boulders. It was faint but you could hear it, and then we heard breathing. It sounded like you come out of the water and you take heavy breaths when you finally reach the surface again, and then rattling of leaves before it ran away or got something. Then the teachers who were still awake at the time shined a light to my tent. I could see an outline of something right next to my head with what seemed like a rabbit in its mouth before it ran off and wasn't seen again till literally 4 months ago last week. Not in the woods but pretty close. I have woods around the back and sides of my house. I saw this tall thing with big glowing yellow eyes that didn't make a sound on loose gravel, and none of the dogs in the immediate area, not even my dog whom I was walking around the house to do his business before he went to bed, barked at it until I spoke. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because I often would see things in the dark where the light didn't hit that weren't there, so I dismissed it as such when it was moving up the driveway by the well. Then about 2 minutes later I saw some legs moving, so I thought it was a stray dog because there are a lot of them that are in the neighborhood that vista my house, so I yelled, "Get out of here, get," like I do for stray dogs, when it stopped and looked at me. The way it moved was like a horse would when it turns. By the height and placement of the eyes were way off to be a horse, not to mention the eyes were glowing. If anyone isn't aware about how you can tell a predator from a prey animal, it's all in the placement of the eyes. A prey animal will have eyes on the side of the head and only glow when light is shined into them, while a predator will have eyes in the front of the head that will glow regardless of light being shined in them or not. I was hiking across Newfoundland, following an old railway that was long ago disassembled and turned into a giant trail, sleeping wherever I found myself at night. One day I ran into a small cottage town, except everything was abandoned. Trailers falling apart, bus conversions burnt out, small cabins all shuttered up. It was creepy but interesting at the same time. The sun was waning, so I decided to set up camp in a mostly empty lot that had an abandoned truck slowly falling into a ravine near it. Cooked up some food and crawled into my tent to sleep. I wake up sometime in the night and I hear footsteps outside my tent. At first I think it's an animal, but the steps sound like someone walking, a human. The steps get closer and go around my tent. I slowly and quietly pull out my knife. If he tries to get in, my plan is to stab first and ask questions later. Anyone trying to get into my tent at night in the middle of nowhere is looking to do some kind of harm. My heart is racing at this point, but I try to just be quiet. Luckily the steps start moving away from the tent until I can't hear them anymore. I wait a bit to see if they'll come back, but I don't hear anything. I slowly get out of my tent. I don't see anything. Without turning on my flashlight, I quickly take down everything and stuff it into my bag. After that I just started walking down the trail to get the hell out of there. I walked until daytime, came across a road and flagged down a truck. That guy was nice and drove me to town where I got a hotel. The creepy thing, when I think back to it, was that whoever that was likely watched me walk into town from one of the abandoned structures. I'm guessing a squatter. I'd like to think he was just curious, but I'm glad I didn't stay and wait to see if he'd be back. Last summer I was camping in Washington on the east side of the Cascades with a few friends. My girlfriend and I were the last up at night and were awoken to a commotion behind us. At first we thought it was our friends returning from their tents, but after shining our headlamps in the tent's direction, we saw nothing. Just as I stood up, I noticed right in front of the garbage bag was a skunk trying to scavenge our waste. I turned to run towards it to scare it off without thinking. First it started to run but then stopped. At that moment my heart stopped. I was convinced it was going to spray me and I made an extremely stupid mistake. However, I lucked out and it continued off into the forest. At that point we grabbed the garbage and started the uphill trek to the dumpster to throw away our trash. As we reached the top of the hill, there is a dirt road with a dumpster about 50 yards on the left. Right as we get onto the road, I see a pair of glowing eyes about waist high cross the road away from the dumpster completely silently. It looked as if the eyes floated across the road. I motioned for my girlfriend to stop and asked her if she saw that. She said no. I told her I saw something and for her not to move and stand behind me. I held up the bag of garbage in one hand and my arm out in the other hand. The creature moved slowly, slightly towards us, but also up the hill into the woods about 30 yards away before it stopped. I stood there and stared and stomped and made noise for a couple minutes, but it never blinked or budged. All of a sudden I heard something coming up from the other side and I look and see another camper with a light coming to bring her trash to the dumpster. When I looked back into the woods, the eyes had disappeared. My girlfriend and I quickly walked backwards to the dumpster, dumped the trash and hurried back to camp. I still have no clue to this day what I had an encounter with, but I believe it was big enough to be either a cougar or a really big brave coyote. My girlfriend said she never saw anything. When I was young, like maybe 9 to 10, my cousin and I were walking down behind my grandparents' house, and at the edge of the woods was their pig pen. The back fence bordered the woods and was heavily overgrown with bushes. There was a small path we had worn out and a very small clearing where we had put some chairs. It was kind of a natural clubhouse. Once you were in that tiny clearing, you couldn't see in or out of it. We were walking down the little path, and just before we got to the clearing I could see someone, an adult, sitting in one of the chairs. Kind of leaned over with his hands on his head. I turned around and ran over my cousin getting out of there. She ran behind me asking what's wrong. I didn't stop running till I got back to my grandparents' house. I told my granddad and we all went back down there, but when we got back he was gone. The thing is that even at the age I was, we had to duck down to get to the clearing. A full-grown adult would have had to crawl hands and knees to get in or out of the clearing. I have no idea how anyone even noticed the entrance to the path, it was so discreet. I also have no idea how he was able to get out of there before we got back. I'm 46, and I can still see the image of him sitting there like it was yesterday. Walking a section of the Appalachian Trail with a couple of buddies when we happened across a bundle of sticks. The sticks were made into a figure, kinda similar to the ones from the Blair Witch Project. It was obviously placed there by someone, as it was dead center on the middle of the trail, leaning against a rock. I thought it was cool, so I grabbed it and put it in my backpack. Anyway, we finished the hike and set up for the night in our camping spot. We were all pretty wiped out from the long day, so after dinner we retired to our respective tents and conked out for the night. The next morning, I was the first one awake, so I got up to make the coffee, and what did I find? An identical bundle of sticks to the one we'd found, sitting atop the pile of charred wood from the previous night's fire. First thing I did was check my pack, and sure enough the one I'd picked up was still there. Each of my friends swore they didn't put it there, and I obviously said the same. It was weird because we were all adamant about not putting it there, but I can never be sure one of them wasn't fucking with the other two of us. The thing that messes with me is the bundle I found in the morning was almost an exact replica of the one we found on the trail earlier. And, I find it hard to believe one of the other guys could have made such a close replica without being able to model it after the one in my pack. And it's not like either would have placed the one on the trail beforehand for us to stumble upon, as it was far out in the middle of nowhere. I want to believe one of them pulled a prank on the other two because the alternative scares the shit out of me. I told this before. My friend and I were walking home from school one day. We took a different path than usual, and we stumbled upon someone's house. It was one of those isolated homes, surrounded by forest on all sides. I noticed something white on the edge of the lawn as we passed. I took a look at it, and it looked like half of a human pelvis. I asked my friend, who hunted, what he thought, and he said it didn't look like a deer or coyote. As we were studying it, the homeowner storms out of his house, and starts to chase us. And I mean really chase us. For a good half-mile or so, until we lost him. It was more than just trying to chase us away, I think he was trying to get us. We never told anyone at the time. I tell the story now, over a decade later, and people think I'm bullshitting. I just hope my friend was wrong, and the guy was just a fucking loon with animal bones on his lawn. Me and a group of 20 others were hiking in a two-person side-to-side line through thick woods at around 1 a.m. We managed to find a muddy road which we continued to walk over for miles before going back into the woods. While walking on the muddy road, I held a conversation with one of my friends that was to the right of me. After a while of talking, I noticed that my group was further ahead of me than before, so I picked up the pace. As I got closer, I noticed something odd. The friend I was talking to was already with the rest of my group. I asked him how did he get back so quick, and he turned, looked at me and said, "I was wondering where you were, you disappeared for a good 5 minutes." Let's just say I didn't feel alright after hearing those words. I know for a fact I was speaking to him earlier, and if not him, then someone exactly the same with all the same gear. Luckily nothing happened after that, but I was pretty shook for the rest of the hiking night. This all happened in Poland when I was a teenager, part of what I call survivalist camp. I posted this on another thread back in August, but figured I'd share again. Of the countless hours I've spent in the woods, it's the one time, the only few seconds, that I can't explain. I distance hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early, or staying out late, to get as many miles in as possible. Sometimes, walking in the pitch dark with a low light headlamp gets spooky. I grew up in the woods of this area. I've slept under our canopy of stars more nights than I can count. I've trekked thousands of miles of trail, riverbank, lake shore, ridge, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because it's important you understand I've heard, seen, and smelt about all this region has to offer in the way of wilderness. My scariest experience though happened at about 0430 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for another 30 to 45 minutes, another hour past that until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between two steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple, and old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, zoned out. Then I heard a loud crack. And I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. 0430 in springtime means I'm the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. Dead quiet. Mid-step I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts. The thought that instantly flashed in my mind as I stood there balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around, and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I had just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get out of here. To describe it as best I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a smallish tree. More a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head being that this sound was a crack, and not a thud or thump. And I have described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me, and it was loud and clear. Now, as I stood there completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from. And I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant, as soon as I got the courage to move towards this noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This made me very nervous. My head's somewhere between meth fiend murder and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass. I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 20 to 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep to the 180 turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail. It didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point. Trying to be quiet. Taking tiny, shallow breaths so I can listen while humping it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. I just imagined wet, rotten, death. I've actually worked scenes where humans have expired in a past life as a firefighter. This was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I kept walking fast. By the time I made the top of that ridge, I was huffing, and the first light was showing. I didn't stop moving until full light was out, and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in our woods. I've smelled it all. I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall, and especially leafed-out branches, make a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times. I don't know. Not saw, but heard. I was about 14 or 15 and playing capture the flag with my cousins. It's a pretty large family, and my friend. We're playing at my grandparents' house, which has cow fields on 3 sides and woods on the last. It's not deep enough to get lost, but big and overgrown enough to not want to be there at night. Anyways, I'm trying to find the flag when I hear whistling from the woods. Sounds kinda like the Disney Robin Hood song O.D. Lolly, but faster, lower pitched, and a lot more notes. Out of my family, only me, my little brother, and my friend can whistle, and only my friend can maybe whistle like that. So I wander off into the woods thinking my friend is there and stop in front of an old bodark tree. The whistling sounded like it was coming out of the tree, so I figured my friend had climbed the tree. I was about to climb up to find him, when I saw him walking outside the tree line. I freaked out and got out of there and ran to him. Whistling stopped once I reached him. He heard it and I heard it, and we both got the hell away from the woods. From there, my story with the whistling ends. My friend, however, was not so lucky. For a few months afterwards, he and others around him would hear whistling like someone trying to get attention. Just one note really quick. One that really sends shivers down my spine was when his mom and him were alone in the house and heard it a few times. His mom called the police about a possible intruder. They came, cleared the house, found nothing, but heard the whistle a few times themselves. As far as I know, it stopped after a few months, but I still am creeped out by that tree. When I was younger, we would go camping at a place called Bear Creek in TN. The campsite we got was always the best, as my grandfather was best friends with the owner of the place where you could camp. The place backed up into nothing but miles of woods with your nearest neighbor like 2 to 3 miles away. Anyways, at our campground we had a big ass creek with a bridge overhead. Well, on the 3rd day we were there, I remember everyone being around the fire and me wandering off to the bridge. There on the other side were a group of black-robed people staring back at me. They just stared, no faces being shown. One had a knife of some kind, while another motioned for me to come over with them. When they started over the bridge towards me, I ran back and my family grabbed their guns and started to point at them. They calmly went back over the bridge and never saw them again. When I was about 13 to 14, me and some friends went camping somewhere in the center of England for 2 days, and we were basically fucking miles from any footpath or road. First night was fine and we had breakfast and just kind of chilled for the whole day doing nothing when we went walking, and after maybe 2 to 3 miles of walking I found a deer that had been torn to fucking shreds, like to the point where you could barely tell it was a deer. We turned around and went back to camp just discussing this and our dumb theories as to what killed it and such. Fast forward to that night and my friends are being dumb and throwing deodorant cans onto the fire to blow them up, right next to a flammable fucking tent, and am the last one to go to bed at 4 a.m. I am also the first to wake up at around 7 and we find 2 more torn to shred deers just past our fire. We packed up and left immediately because there wasn't anything that would kill 2 bucks in those woods, so we still have no clue what it was. This definitely falls into the strangest category. Was solo pitching for a long weekend in the Pacific Northwest, and one day was in the rare part of the trail that is closer to civilization, so there was a higher chance of other hikers/campers being around. I saw 1 or 2 people but was mostly from afar, and as it was nightfall soon and getting cold and I was getting deeper into the woods, I knew the odds of seeing someone else was highly unlikely. I was hiking around a small pond and was going to set up camp nearby when I heard some shuffling noises behind a small boulder/rock wall type thing. It was a repetitive noise, and got louder and then quieter, but never stopped at all, and basically if you're a regular hiker you know a noise that does not fit the woods when you hear it. I took out my 2 knives that I carry when hiking, and slowly walked around the boulder, honestly not knowing what I would see. What I did not expect, and was very shocked to see, was a very attractive couple in their 20s having very aggressive but happy doggy-style sex on a blanket. Obviously they were as shocked as I was to see one another, and they freaked out and yelled, as did I, and as they covered their bodies in their clothes in a panic I awkwardly apologized, picked up all my gear and just sort of jogged off into the woods, passing their tent they had pitched along the way, same way I had seen the tent the dude had pitched in his nether regions. Also in another part of the country I thought I saw a bear once and it turned out to be a giant pile of mud. I wonder if that couple is still together, and if tell that story when they get drunk at parties, like I do. I've posted recently, but definitely the worst thing I've seen in the woods, even if it was just inside the woods. I was a rookie first responder. One fall night, I found myself on a call with little information. Caller had noticed an old fleet-side pickup truck parked off a country road. They also reported a horrible smell. Arrived on scene, and immediately noticed the horrible smell. We spot a banged-up tailgate poking out of some underbrush just off the road. Worked around the driver's side, and see that the windows are blacked out. Flies begin bouncing off us from all directions. I grab the door handle, pop the button in, and pull. I was stepping away from the truck as the door swung open, but the smell still hammered me in the face. Flies everywhere. My partner shines his light into the cab, and we see dark, grimy clothing draped over a human shape. It was my first experience with a deceased individual, luckily my only one where the decomp was advanced. The remaining skin was slouching, making it difficult to approximate much about the person before death. There was an outline of human putrefaction on the cloth seats. The windows, which I assumed were covered with black bags, were actually layered with black film from the breakdown. The sight of the face was horrific. Imagine an organic abstract statue being peeled by gravity. Was hiking once with a couple friends at night. Around 3 a.m., it was in an area that wasn't public woods, just middle of nowhere. It was by a lake. We pull up in my car to a long gravel road big enough for one car and that's it. Big ditches on both sides full of water. We start to walk around and we see a light on in the distance. Shouldn't be any houses anywhere near, woods should have been empty. So we decided to head towards it. We walk for about 30 minutes and start seeing like bed sheets, or just big squares of fabric. They were hanging from trees by ropes. Appearing randomly and very dirty. Odd, but they seem to lead towards the light and we head forward. We get to the top of a hill. There's a circle of sheets hanging around the top of the hill. In the middle was a chair. A machete, knife, and ice pick. We are getting a little creeped out, so we grab the weapons and decide to head back. The light was still far away. Seemed like it never got closer actually. We swear we could hear footsteps behind us. I was in the back. We hear in the distance some water splashing. Like a big rock was falling in. Like the big deep splash you would hear. We keep stopping, checking around us with our phone flashlights. Trying to hear where the splash noises were coming from, if the footsteps we heard would stop. We get about 5 minutes away from my car. We hear footsteps, we stop and just listen. A few seconds passed and that splash noise happened right next to us. I look and the water was not moving. Nothing fell in, we didn't know what made the noise, but we start sprinting back to the car. The light disappeared. We get to the car and I floor it backwards down the road and couldn't turn around due to the ditches on both sides. We kept all the weapons and eyed what the sheets were, what made the water sound, what happened right next to us, or what the light was and how it disappeared, and we never got closer to it after 30 minutes of walking. Oh well. We lived. So I was in the California Sierras and my dad's friend, basically my uncle, owns land over there. So we went for a night hike with around 13 people. Keep in mind most of us were experienced campers, and we're aware of the weed growers up there. So since there are obvious dangers of the night, we brought flashlights and 2 9mm handguns. We went up this giant hill, like huge, and when we finally got up there, there was only a thin trail. We continued and suddenly I got a very, very bad feeling, like something was going down. And literally 3 minutes later we hear 3 consecutive gunshots, then an insane laugh, followed by running around the trail. We started to run back and I was in the front of the back and I was cut off by a man in the middle of the trail with an axe. I hit him with a flashlight and he fell over and we ran down the hill. TBH, I have never ran so fast in memory. We heard more gunshots and we eventually got down and ran to the property and packed up at 12 a.m. and got the hell out of there. We still frequently visit, but we are not going on any more hikes like that, especially at night. We were out with my brother's buddies getting high and drunk and trying to set up tents for the night, when I hear a howl. I thought it was one of the girls who was coming to the party, so I howled back, cause I was high, and they howled again. I realized and said loudly, "That's not a person." We heard those howls from about 200 feet away. 10 seconds later we heard it 40 feet away, then we heard from all directions, yelping, coyotes. We all sobered up for 10 seconds and we all yelled, "Run!" I didn't know which tent to get to, so I saw one of my bro's friends, we'll call him Jerry, who dove into his tent, so as I ran to him I just screamed, "Jerry, close the fucking tent." His brother, let's call him Joey, rammed into my back and pushed the tent on the fucking side. While by then it was closed and the coyotes were in our sight, so me, Jerry, and Connor were in a sideways tent trying not to be sniffed out and possibly ripped up. It was 10:45 p.m. We waited till fucking 6 a.m. to get out of the tent and see that the burgers, hot dogs, and the respective buns were all gone and there were only scraps, along with piss on one of the tents. Being in a tent made for one with 3 people, scared, and claustrophobic with it being hot as fuck, was literally torture. So yeah. That's the scariest thing I saw and was part of in the woods. I went to a wilderness camp in Idaho when I was 17. We would drive vans to carry supplies like food, first aid, miscellaneous. We had set up camp in this clearing, between a creek and the hillside. There were 2 backpacks left in the van, so I offered to go get them. The van was maybe 300 yards away. I grab the 2 backpacks and start walking back. Maybe halfway to the clearing, to my left, the hillside, I see a mountain lion looking at me like a basketball court's length from me. If you don't know Idaho, there's nothing but sagebrush. It was barely obscuring my vision, and I had to do a double take to confirm what the f I just saw. I lifted both backpacks on either side of my but got terrified and ran back to the campsite. If I had to guess, it was probably just as scared of me as I was of it, but it's still the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Another short story. While I was in Idaho, the land was a massive cattle grazing area. One morning in our main campsite, the herd moved through our tent area. Woke us all up. The newest kid was sleeping under a shitty tarp shelter, looked like a breeze could knock it over. The fattest, most ripped goddamn bull I've ever seen in my entire life stops next to his tarp shelter and does his loud ass bull scream, whatever it's called. That kid's life probably flashed before his eyes. I was horrified and I was watching this from like 100 feet away. There's always been some form of woods behind my house. Now, there's a subdivision running through part of the woods, but weird things still happen there. Growing up, I got to hear coyotes and foxes screaming in the middle night pretty regularly in the summer. It's a pretty unnerving sound to say the least. One time, there was something screaming in the woods that didn't sound like a fox or a coyote. It honestly sounded like a man, and he sounded pissed off. The entire neighborhood was pretty freaked out by it, and it went on for a while. Someone ended up calling the cops, thinking someone was hurt in the woods or the older man that had a house back there was in trouble. The cops never found anyone and they didn't think it sounded like an animal either. Plus, the older man was fine and was just as confused about the noise as my neighborhood was. To this day, it was one of the creepier things that happened in my neighborhood, and I have a fair amount of other wild stories. My brother once started screaming. I ran over first because our rooms were across the hall, and I jumped onto his bed with him and started soothing him. My parents followed close behind and started asking what happened. He said he saw a blue light, something super bright and blue, lit up his whole room. My dad immediately ran outside, fearing an intruder, with a blue flashlight I guess. Or a car with blue lights. But there was no one there, no cars. We lived by a wooded area and our neighbors were pretty far away. He went to our closest neighbor and asked if they saw anything. They said no. We locked all the doors and windows and didn't call the police. My brother slept in my room that night. From then on, until we moved, my brother needed to sleep in my room most nights, or when he went to sleep in his room, he would come to my room halfway through the night. He refused to use the bathroom alone, and generally never wanted to be alone again. When we moved, my parents let us share a room again, got bunk beds, and things were cool. But he stopped being so scared over time, and I asked him once, and he said after that night, he would see the blue light almost every night. When we moved, it stopped. Creepy, no idea what happened. I don't guess I believe in aliens, but I think my brother probably believes it. He saw other weird things as a kid that stopped over time, and I always saw weird things as a kid too, so. Figured we have crazy lil minds, makes sense, siblings, seeing weird things. Sign of some mental illness that might run in the family. But hell, ever since then my parents moved, I'd tell them no creepy woods. My bedroom has a big bay window and faces my backyard, which is fairly big and surrounded by woods. At the end of our property, probably 50 yards from my room, we have a shed with a motion sensor light. When it goes off in the middle of the night and I look out the window, I generally know it will just be an animal, but there's always a part of me that worries about seeing a person with a machete or something, haha. Anyways, one night it went off, and I looked outside but couldn't really see anything in the direct area where the light was shining. After my eyes adjusted better, I looked a little harder, and at the very edge of where the light was shining I saw someone running/skipping towards my house and shaking their head like crazy. I literally almost shit my pants/threw up from fear. I live at home, my parents' room is on the second floor. I instantly screamed for my dad, and woke him up. As I hear him jump out of bed and start running down the stairs, I realized it was just a fucking deer prancing around. My dad ran into my room and I'm standing there crying from fear but also laughing from embarrassment. He was happy I wasn't in danger, but he was also pissed at me for being an idiot. The couple seconds that I had mistaken it for a person was honestly one of the only times in my life that I truly felt that sickening sense of fear. Here in Australia we've got a cryptid known as the Blue Mountains panther. There's been many sightings and photos of it in the past century in the Blue Mountains region, and it's been blamed on livestock and dog deaths, etc. Some people believe there's a breeding population out in the bush descended from escaped or released circus animals. Anyway, growing up I lived on a 5-acre property that backed onto a national park. Behind our back fence there was literally nothing but bushland with the Blue Mountains on the other side. One night I was out in the backyard with a torch and my dog started whimpering and acting really scared and frantically trying to get inside the house. This was a big border collie and who loved chasing kangaroos through the bush and was an excellent guard dog, so this was very out of character behavior. I shined my torch along the back fence line and there staring back at me were two huge green feline eyes. You know the way cats' eyes look at night in torchlight? But this was no cat. You could tell by the size and distance apart of the eyes that it was something much bigger. Also the height had to have been large dog height, and there was nothing near that fence that anything could have been sitting on. For a few moments the eyes just stared at me and then it slowly started walking along the fence line, with that slow, deliberate way that a cat moves when it's stalking something, all the while the eyes still looking at me. As you could imagine, I got the hell back inside in a hurry and let the dog in too. A few days later I heard that a man down the road woke one morning to find one of his sheep had been killed, torn to pieces. He thought it must have been dogs, but I suspected differently. My backyard leads straight into the woods. My brother and I had a spot we would always hike to not far away. During Thanksgiving we had a friend over and we're gonna show him the spot. My brother wasn't done eating, so my friend and I went ahead and he was gonna catch up. We almost make it to the spot when suddenly behind us we hear frantic crying like an injured child back in the direction of the house. We both think it's my brother, so we run toward it and make it back to the house to find my brother still at the table eating dessert. The adults come back out with us and we lead them to the spot we had been standing. All around were mountain lion tracks. It was that day I learned mountain lions make sounds like crying children to lure in prey. Months later my brother and I were walking the half-mile road to get to our bus stop. I had forgotten one of my books, so I turn around to head to the house. Halfway between me and home I see the mountain lion in a stalking position making his way across the road watching us. About 35 years ago some buddies and I were riding back roads in the deep south. This was actually dirt roads on the back side of a mountain. We were drinking beer and cutting up, had our girls with us. It was my first 4-wheel drive truck and I had to try it out. It was midnight, maybe a little later. We rounded a bend in the road and it ended in a small clearing. My headlights settle on a guy straight from Deliverance, sitting in an old fold-out lawn chair. There were no homes around for miles. He was wearing overalls and dirty cap. Across his lap was a shotgun. He stood up and handled the shotgun but never pointed it at us. I was new to the area from up north. I had never seen anything like this. This guy sitting in the dark in the middle of the forest miles from anywhere. My buddy whispered, "He's got us still. Get out of here now." I threw my truck in reverse and backed out as fast as I could. The whole time I was screaming, "This shit is real. Are you kidding me?" Over and over. It took us over 40 minutes to hit the paved road and another 30 to get to any form of civilization. We laughed about it later. But then old country folks still made their own moonshine. Ended up buying some from a fellow out that direction a few months later. That stuff got me so drunk so quickly. Those fellows were good people. Just country folk that lived simple lives and wanted to be left alone. Not horror movie worthy, but it scared the hell out of me at the time. My family used to go camping with a few groups of friends when I was a kid. I remember one Christmas when I was about 5, we were camping out in the bush. There were 9 kids in total at our campsite. We were allowed to wander through the bush. The parents would give us a walkie-talkie to tell us when to come back to camp. We never wandered far. Anyway, out of nowhere an unfamiliar voice came over our walkie-talkie. It was a man's voice. He said he was Santa and that he was trying to find us to give us our presents and asked us to look for him. We all ran back to our campsite all excited that Santa had talked us. The walkie-talkie was taken off us and we weren't allowed to go anywhere for the rest of the trip. We were pretty devastated at the time. But I understand the seriousness and creepiness of it now looking back as an adult. I was camping up in Heber, Arizona with my brothers and my dad. I was 15 or so at the time and we were deep in the woods, far from most other camps. Me and my brothers had our own tent whilst my dad had a separate one not far off. He likes to give us our privacy while we were camping. We would usually run around a bit at night before going to bed, entering our camp to sleep at about 11 p.m. One night we were playing hide and seek when we heard a branch snap a few yards from us. We assumed it was an elk or something since they were pretty common in our area. We would typically go to our tent if we saw one in hopes of not agitating it. So that's what we did. I called for my youngest brother who was still hiding and he revealed himself to be hiding behind a branch pile not super far from where the noise originated. We went to the tent and I decided since it was already pretty late that we should just go to sleep. The next morning I went to check the spot for elk prints since I found them pretty fascinating. Instead, I found large cat prints. I knew they were cat prints because they had the 4 toe pads and the large center pad as well as no claw marks. I was honestly kind of excited. I had always wanted to see a mountain lion or a bobcat in the wild but it never happened. Knowing that I was that close to either one was very thrilling. It then occurred to me that my youngest brother was hiding, separated from us scarily close to the paw prints location. It occurred to me that if that was a hungry mountain lion and had taken notice of my 6-year-old brother hiding alone, it could have possibly taken the chance. We stopped doing hide and seek at night to avoid those types of situations and we actually set up a roll call system to ensure everyone was together at night. Now I know a mountain lion likely wouldn't have done anything had it seen him, but still, the risk felt very real and I worried that had I not heard it I could have lost my brother. A few years ago I was camping in the Serengeti as a part of a safari I was doing. We had set up our tents in a designated camping area with a bathroom building. I'm from the States, and had been camping and backpacking tons of times, but the Serengeti felt different. We could hear baboons from our tents for one. In the middle of the night I had to pee, so I carefully unzipped my tent and started walking through the grass toward the bathrooms. Already I was feeling a little jumpy. When I creaked open the bathroom door, a crap ton of bats flew over my head out of the building. It felt like that scene in Batman Begins where young Bruce Wayne fell in the cave, haha. I was just really hoping that nothing else was in the bathroom and it just felt really eerie. It ended up all right, but I was really glad to get back to my tent. On a separate trip, I was hiking through southern Ethiopia with a guide to a lake where we would be able to take a boat to see some hippos. It was quiet for the most part, but a portion of our hike took us through some brush and trees, and we started hearing this loud, gruesome moaning and the whole forest felt still. We looked and looked to figure out what was making the sound, and we saw a massive baboon laying face down on the ground, dying. We gathered from its position that it must have fallen from a tree and seriously injured itself, and was crying out in pain. Obviously we kept our distance because we didn't know how it would react, or if any other animals would be nearby. The noise it made was both heartbreaking and terrifying, and it had almost spiritual quality to it. We moved on shortly after, but I'll forever remember how I felt watching this animal die alone in the forest. Honestly, one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I was helping run a 99 planter in Trinity County near the Pines. If you grew wheat in locals Emerald Triangle you know what I'm talking about, and my girlfriend came out to visit. We had a day off and decided to hike down a well-known ATV trail. Well, we fuck up at some point and literally end up walking into the barrel of a fucking AK-47. Like dude was just there all of a sudden from the bush. He knew we were coming. He was a tiny little Mexican dude and spoke absolutely no English. He was as scared as were we. He was yelling instructions at using Spanish and I barely knew any. Fucking luckily my girl knew enough to get by having grown up as a kid in East LA. She calmed him down and explained we had a spot over on the next hill and that we were just hiking. Dude calmed down and actually ended up walking us back to the main trail where we parted. He was all fucking business then whole time. Never smiled or laughed about the mix-up or took his guard down. We most likely had stumbled on an illegal-ass cartel grow. There's a ton out there and we're lucky as fuck he didn't just kill us and bury us. I went hiking around the Lake District, England, in 2018 with my dad. It's a generally hilly area and rural, very beautiful. We stayed in a B&B for a week, and for a few of these days it was raining heavily in February. My dad's been trying to complete his bucket list for the last few years, and hiking in heavy rain was on it because it reminded him of Brazil from when he lived there. We had a bunch of gear and walked around. The plan was to start small in the Lake District, and then eventually work our way up to Mount Snowdon in Wales. During our second day of hiking, the ground was very sludgy. We sat down on a steep hill, 20 feet above the ground level, and watched the sunset. Then the ground started moving beneath us. It was a landslide, and our weight on top of it had pretty much done it. I slid down 15 feet of mud and sprained my ankle badly. My dad reached out to grab me and slid down with me. I had managed to dig my feet into the mud and stopped myself. I was pretty much at the bottom by the time I stopped, and the ground was pretty much leveling out there. I was covered in about 1.5 feet of dirt and I was muddy from head to toe. It took about 20 minutes to get me out safely, and we had the air ambulance come and grab me because I was afraid I had broken my leg. That's the closest near-death experience I've come to, and the scariest moment I've had when hiking.